Greetings. We are at the start of September in 30 AD. So the subtext today is Jesus leaves Bezek and goes to Ainon and Mara of Suphan. I'm guessing that's a person, but we'll see. Jesus still taught and cured in the country around the inn. The neophytes, the pagan caravan, and many others took their way to the Jordan with the intention of crossing. The ferry was an hour and a half to the south of Bezek, below a city called Zarthan, which was 1 hour's distance from the first named, and lower down on the Jordan. On the opposite side of the river, between Bezek and Zarthan, was a place called Adam. It was near that city of Zarthan, that the Jordan had ceased to flow while the children of Israel were crossing. Solomon once had some vases cast here. The industry was still carried on. West of the bend that the Jordan makes in this neighborhood was a mountain extending off to Samaria, and in it was a mine from which was obtained a metal, something like that which we call brass. Jesus taught all along the route. When questioned as to whether he intended to teach in Zarthan, he answered, "There are other localities that need it more. John was often there, so you may ask the people whether he feasted or lived on dainty fare." The Jordan was here crossed by a great ferry, just below which began the detour of the river toward the west. After crossing, Jesus and his followers went on for about 2 hours eastward and along the northern bank of a little stream that flowed into the Jordan somewhere below the ferry. Then they crossed another stream near which lay Succoth to their left, looking as if they had just stepped over it. They rested under tents between Succoth and Ainon, which places may have been about 4 hours apart. If they had again crossed the river and gone up a little distance, they could have seen Salem, which was hidden from them by the hilly bank. It was opposite Ainon and somewhat below the middle of another bend of the Jordan westward. Monday, September 4th. Crowds innumerable were collected at Ainon. The pagans were encamped between the hill upon which it was built and the Jordan. There were 10 Pharisees present, some from Ainon, some from other places, among them the son of Simeon of Bethany. Some of them were reasonable enough and animated by upright intentions. The little city of Ainon lay to the north side of the hill, as if built up entirely of beautiful villas. On this side, beyond the city, was a source of a basin destined for baptism, which was on the east side of the hill. The stream was conducted through the hill in metal pipes, which could be closed and opened when needed. There was a spring house over the source. The Pharisees, among them the son of Simon the leper, came out to this place to meet Jesus and the disciples. They welcomed them cordially and politely, led them into a tent, washed their feet, brushed their garments, and presented them refreshments of honey, bread, and wine. Jesus congratulated them on the good dispositions of many among them, though, as he said, it grieved him that they belonged to that sect. He accompanied them to the city, where he soon came to a court in which a crowd of sick of all kinds. Some natives of the city, some strangers, were awaiting his arrival. Some were lying under tents, others were in the halls that opened into the court. Many could walk, and Jesus helped them one after another with imposition of hands and words of admonition. The disciples assisted in bringing the sick forward, and raising them and freeing them from their covers, etc. The Pharisees and many others were present. Several women stood at a distance, pale and enveloped in their mantles. They were afflicted with an issue of blood. When Jesus had finished with the rest, he approached them, laid his hands upon them, and cured them. Among the sick were paralytics and anemic, consumptives, some with abscesses on their necks and other parts of the body, though not such as to render them unclean, the deaf and the mute, in a word, sufferers of all kinds. At the extremity of this court was a large portico opening to the city. I saw in it many spectators, Pharisees and women. To the Pharisees of Ainon, since there were upright souls among them, and also because they had received him frankly and respectfully, Jesus showed a certain indulgence that he had not exhibited in other places. He wished thereby to make void the reproach that he associated only with publicans, sinners, and vagrants. He wanted to show them that he would pay them due honor if they demeaned themselves properly and with upright intentions. They showed great activity in preserving order among the people on this occasion. Jesus allowed them to do it. While Jesus was busy curing the sick, a beautiful woman of middle age and in the garb of a stranger entered the large portico by the gate leading into the city, or from the city. Her head and hair were wound in a thin veil woven with pearls. She wore a bodice in shape, somewhat like a heart, and open at the sides. Something like a scapular thrown over the head and fastened together around the body by straps reaching from the back. Around the neck and breast it was ornamented with cords and pearls. From it fell, in folds to the ankle, 2 deep skirts, one shorter than the other. Both were of fine wool embroidered with large colored flowers. The sleeves were wide and fastened with armlets. To the shoulder straps that connected the front and back of the bodice was attached the upper part of a short mantle that fell over the arms. Over this flowed a long veil of the whiteness of wool. The woman, ashamed and anxious, entered slowly and timidly, her pale countenance bespeaking confusion and her eyes red from weeping. She wanted to approach Jesus, but the crowd was so great that she could not get near him. The Pharisees, keeping order, went to her, and she at once addressed them. "Lead me to the prophet, that he may forgive my sins and cure me." The Pharisees stopped her with the words, "Woman, go home. What do you want here? The prophet will not speak with you. How can he forgive you your sins? He will not busy himself with you, for you are an adulteress." When the woman heard these words, she grew pale. Her countenance assumed a frightful expression. She threw herself onto the ground, rent her mantle from top to bottom, snatched her veil from her head, and cried, "Ha! Then I am lost. Now they lay hold of me. They are tearing me to pieces. See, there they are." And she named 5 devils who were raging against her, one of her husband, the other 4 of her paramours. It was a fearful spectacle. Some of the women standing around her raised her from the ground and bore her wailing to her home. Jesus knew well what was going on, but he would not put the Pharisee of this place to shame. He did not interfere, but quietly continued his work of healing, for her hour had not yet come. Soon after, accompanied by the disciples and Pharisees and followed by the people, Jesus went through the city to the hill upon which John had formerly taught. It was in the center of moss-covered ramparts, and there were some buildings around. On the side by which they approached was a half-ruined castle. In one of those towers Herod took up his abode during John's teaching. The whole hill was already covered with the expectant crowd. Jesus mounted to the place where John had taught. It was covered with a large awning, open on all sides. Here he delivered a long discourse in which he spoke of the mercy of God to men, particularly to his own people. He ran through the entire scriptures, showed God's guidance to his chosen nation, his promises to them, and proved that they were all being realized in the presence. Jesus did not, however, say so openly at Ainon what he had done at Bezek, that he was himself the Messiah. He spoke also of John, his imprisonment, and his mission. One crowd of listeners was at intervals supplanted by another that all might hear his words. Jesus questioned some of them as to why they wanted to receive baptism, why they had put it off till the present, and what they thought their ceremony to be. He divided them into classes, some of which were baptized at once and others only after further instruction. I remember the answer of one group of neophytes to the question why they had delayed till now. One of the number said, "Because John constantly taught that a man had to come who would be greater than himself. We waited consequently in order to receive still greater grace." At these words, all that approved the response raised their hands. They formed a special class to receive more particular instructions as preparation for baptism. The discourse ended at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then Jesus and the disciples went with the Pharisees down the hill and into the city, where a great entertainment had been prepared for him in one of the public halls. But when he drew near the hall, he stopped short, saying, "I have another kind of hunger." And he asked, though he already knew, where that woman lived whom they had sent away from him in the morning. They pointed out the house. It was near the hall of entertainment. Jesus left his companions standing where they were, while he went forward and entered the house through the courtyard. As Jesus approached, I saw the fearful torture and affliction of the woman inside. The devil who had possession of her drove her from one corner to another. She was like a timorous animal that would hide itself. As Jesus was traversing the court and drawing near to where she was, she fled through a corridor and into a cellar in the side of the hill which her house was built. And it was a vessel like a great cask, narrow above and wide below. She wanted to hide herself in it, but when she tried to do so, it burst with a loud crash. It was an immense earthen vessel. Jesus, meantime, halted and cried, "Mara of Suphan, wife of..." Here he pronounced her husband's name, which I have forgotten. "I command thee, in the name of God, to come to me." Then the woman, enveloped from head to foot, as if the demon forced her still to hide in her manner, came creeping to Jesus' feet on all fours, like a dog awaiting the whip. But Jesus said to her, "Stand up." She obeyed, but drew her veil tightly over her face, around her neck, as if she wanted to strangle herself. Then said the Lord to her, "Uncover thy face." And she unwound her veil, but lowering her eyes and averting them from Jesus, as if forced to do so by an interior power, Jesus, approaching his head to hers, said, "Look at me." And she obeyed. He breathed upon her. A black vapor went out of her on all sides, and she fell unconscious before him. Her servant maids, alarmed by the loud bursting of the cask, had hurried thither and were standing nearby. Jesus directed them to take their mistress upstairs and lay her on a bed. He soon followed with 2 of his disciples that had accompanied him, and found her weeping bitter tears. He went to her, laid his hand on her head, and said, "Thy sins are forgiven thee." She wept vehemently and sat up. And now her 3 children entered the room, a boy about 12 years old and 2 girls about 7 and 9. The girls wore little short-sleeved tunics embroidered in yellow. Jesus stepped forward to meet the children, spoke to them kindly, asked them some questions, and gave them some instruction. Their mother said, "Thank the prophet, he has cured me." Whereupon the little ones fell on the ground at Jesus' feet. He blessed them, led them one by one to their mother in order of age, and put their little hands into hers. It seemed to me that by this action Jesus removed from the children the disgrace, and thus legitimatized them. For they were the fruits of adulterous unions. Jesus still consoled the woman, telling her that she would be reconciled with her husband, and counseling her thenceforth to live righteously in contrition and penance. After that, he went with the disciples to the entertainment of the Pharisees. The woman was from Suphan, in the land of Moab. She was a descendant of Orpah, the widow of Chilion, and daughter-in-law of Naomi, who, upon the latter's advice, did not go with her to Bethlehem, though Ruth, the widow of Orpah's other son, Mahlon, accompanied Naomi thither. Orpah, the widow of Chilion, who was the son of Elimelech of Bethlehem, married again in Moab, and from that union sprang the family of Mara the Suphanite. She was a Jewish and rich, but an adulteress. The 3 children that she had with her at the time of her conversion were illegitimate. Her legitimate children had been retained by their father when he repudiated his unfaithful wife, their mother. She was living at this time in the house of her own in Ainon. For a long time she had conceived sentiments of sorrow for her disorders and had done penance, her conduct being so reserved and proper that she had won the esteem of even the most respectable women of Ainon. The Baptist preaching against Herod's unlawful connection had strongly afflicted her. She was often possessed by 5 devils. They had again seized upon her when, as a last resource, she had gone to the court where Jesus was curing the sick. The rebuff of the Pharisees and their words, which in her deep dejection she had taken as true, had driven her to the brink of despair. Through her descent from Orpah, Ruth's sister-in-law, she was connected with the house of David, the ancestral line of Jesus. It was shown me how this stream, deviating from her from its course and troubled by her abominable sins, was purified anew by her grace of Jesus and flowed once more in its direct course toward the church. Interesting way to put it. Jesus went into the entertainment hall in which were the Pharisees and the rest of the disciples, and took his place with them at table. The Pharisees are somewhat displeased with that Jesus had left them and gone to seek the woman whom they had so harshly repulsed that morning before so many people. But they said nothing, fearing to receive a reproof themselves. Jesus treated them with much consideration during the meal and taught in numerous similitudes and parables. Toward the middle of the entertainment, the 3 children of the Suphanite entered in their holiday dresses. One of the little girls bore an urn full of fragrant water, and the other had a similar one of nard, and the boy carried a vessel. They entered the hall by the door opposite the unoccupied side of the table, cast themselves before Jesus, and set their presents on the table in front of him. Mara herself followed with her maids, but she dared not approach. She was veiled and carrying a shining crystal vase with colored veins like marble, in which, surrounded by upright sprays of delicate green foliage, were various kinds of costly aromatics. Her children had offered similar vases, but smaller. The Pharisees cast forbidding glances upon the mother and the children, but Jesus said, "Draw near, Mara." And she stepped humbly behind him, while her children, to whom she had handed it, deposited her offering besides the other on the table. Jesus thanked her. The Pharisees murmured, as later on they did at Magdalene's presence to Jesus. They thought it was a great waste, quite opposed to economy and compassion for the needy. However, they only wanted something to bring against the poor woman. Jesus spoke to her very kindly, as also to the children, to whom he presented some fruit, which they took away with them. The Suphanite remained veiled, and standing humbly behind Jesus. He said to the Pharisees, "All gifts come from God. For precious gifts, gratitude gives in return what it has most precious, and that is no waste. The people that gather and prepare these spices must live." Then he directed one of the disciples to give the value of them to the poor, spoke some words upon the woman's conversion and repentance, restored her to the good opinion of all, and called upon the inhabitants of the city to treat her affectionately. Mara spoke not a word, but wept quietly under her veil the whole time. At last, she cast herself in silence at Jesus' feet, rose, and left the dining hall. Jesus took this occasion to give some instruction against adultery. Which among them, he asked, felt himself free from spiritual adultery? He remarked that John had not been able to convert Herod, but that this poor woman had of her own accord turned away from her evil life, and then he related the parable of the sheep lost and found. He had already consoled the woman in her own house, assuring her that her children would turn out well, and holding out to her the hope that she should one day join the women under Martha's supervision and work for the benefit of the inns. I saw the disciples after the entertainment giving abundantly what was left to the poor. Then Jesus went down to the west side of the hill of Ainon, where the camp of the pagans lay at some distance. There was also, I think, a tent on this side. Then Jesus instructed the pagans. Ainon was in the dominion of Herod, but it belonged like a property across the boundary to the tetrarch Philip. Many soldiers of Herod were again there trying to find out news for their master. And that ends this reading. All right, I just have one thing to note about the woman. She was tormented by devils, probably openly, because they saw how much she resisted them. Now, that's the important variable. That's the variable I'm going to talk about. Demons they're subtle. They'll let you do the work against yourself. They just want to animate a voice inside of you called despair, which is part of your corruption from having sinned. When we sin, we cause despair within ourselves, and then that despair can cause us to perpetually live on in that sin. So, the demons were still tormenting her. Why? Well, if her own self-voices were going to prevent herself from seeking forgiveness, they don't have to do any work. The fact that they were tormenting her openly gave away their position. So the heaviness of the torment and the boulder of her guilt tried to cripple her, because Satan attempts to paralyze our souls with despair. Yet she did not despair. That's the point. The devils knew she did not despair. The devils knew she had hope. And sometimes I think demons always overplay their hands, again, because they cannot account for how much humility can render people near to God in their hearts, despite how much sin and corruption they've been exposed to. Notice that there was one demon for each adulterous occasion, as well as the demon of the man who was her husband, who probably wasn't forgiving her and was keeping that sin sore. Now, if her husband could forgive her, that would go a long way into cleansing the demon. But in the Bible, in the book of Tobit, we get something similar with Asmodeus tormenting, it's Tobit's wife. I don't remember her name. It's Rachel or Sarah. Anyways, I think it's Sarah. Anyways, from whom later on, an exorcist actually calls the demon of female, Asmodeus the demon of female buggery. So I don't know what that might have had to do with the situation, but obviously maybe Asmodeus just tends to torment people sexually. Anyways, also we have Mary Magdalene, who is inflicted with 7 devils. Though we'll see that those devils represent what those devils represent when she gets cleansed of them later on. The amount of sins we commit can gravitate devils to us to punish us further, torment us with despair, although God will allow them to come through so that we can realize what we have drawn to us by committing those evils. So, The devils will always take advantage of what we are ignorant to, and all it takes is a flourishing idea in your head. What if God has special plans for me? What if the devils are openly attacking me because they know I'm imminent for victory? And if we can succeed at giving ourselves a proper pep talk, repeating mantras in praxis on a routine basis that shows us a way back, we won't liberate ourselves of the devils because we can't take them on. However, we can muster our way, crawling on all fours as Mara of Suphan had to the foot of the cross and to our Savior. We just have to never stop hoping. And that's it. Ave Maria.